We have Irving B. Weber with us this afternoon. The new Irving Weber Elementary School is named for you, and we are so pleased, just so pleased. Let's start visiting a little bit about the history of the Irving B. Weber School. Could you tell us the history, a little information about the history of the site?
Well, thank you, Dr. Berger. Now, you want to know the what again?
The history of the site.
Oh, yes, the history of the
building
site, yes.
Is.
It's rather interesting, boys and girls. I don't know whether you ever really stop to think, but this land in Iowa City and Johnson County all belonged to the Indians at one time. They were the Sac and Fox Indians, though the particular tribe in the Johnson County area were the Mesquawkies, and Paushik was their chief. Now, the U.S. government bought the area where our school is going to be in 1837. They bought 1,250,000 acres. I never could get a great deal of information on how much they paid for it. The deal was made in Washington, D.C. Now, you boys and girls might be interested also that Johnson County is one of the few counties in the state where it took 3 treaties with the Indians before they got the entire county. Now, the first treaty was the Black Hawk Treaty of 1832. And that treaty, only about 2 of Johnson County's 21 townships were purchased in that first purchase because it stretched all up and down the Mississippi River. In fact, they bought an area 50 miles in from the Mississippi River all the way from Missouri up to the upper Iowa River. And that 50 miles in from the Mississippi River got just about 2 townships of Johnson County. And then they also had kept out of that first purchase the so-called Keokuk Reserve. The Keokuk Reserve was about 400 square miles up and down the Iowa River where the Indians had their camps, where they lived. And so they kept that area. And then in 1836, that area was purchased by the federal government, and then the Indians were to be given a new reservation where they would live. That first purchase, the Black Hawk purchase, they gave the Indians $20,000 a year for 30 years, and then they also paid $50,000 in debt that the Indians had with the traders on the island there at Davenport. But it's rather interesting, those first purchases. The Black Hawk purchase, there were about 30 Indian chiefs, met with Governor Reynolds of Illinois and General Scott. And they met on the banks of the Mississippi, and they negotiated that big deal there. Then when the Keokuk purchase came along in 1836, there were 1,000 Indians that met down at Davenport, and I could just imagine what a great powwow that must have been. But anyhow, when they made that purchase in 1836, that's when the Indians moved on west from Iowa City.
These first Indians who lived in this area, were they primarily farmers, hunters? How did they survive?
Well, the squaws did the farming. They had the fields, they tilled the soil. The chiefs, the braves, went out and did the hunting, fishing, that sort of thing. And they were always at war with somebody, of course. But it was the women that were the farmers, and they did do a pretty good job of raising the grains that they had to have.
And farming has remained a tradition in that area, hasn't it?
Well, it certainly has. It certainly has.
And is Raret Road the name of the road associated with anyone who lived there, or?
Well, I've never been able to document where the name, the road named Raret, where the name came from. Raret's grandson, L.C. Raret, told me that that road was named for his grandfather, who was Wolfgang Raret, and Wolfgang's wife was Catherine. They came over from Germany in 1840, almost as soon as the area was situated. And according to L.C. Raret, his grandfather and grandmother, used that road first and so much that they named it that. They tell the story, or he tells the story, that one Sunday his grandparents, who were very religious, very good Catholics, wanted to go to church in Iowa City, St. Mary's Church, and they walked the 10 miles into Iowa City, only to find when they got there that the priest was holding services in another town. So then they had to walk all the way back. But that's how devoted the Rarets were. They were good, substantial citizens, and they did a lot to build up the area.
Well, I'm sure you have many more stories to tell about the descendants of that family as well as the neighbors, and we'll come back to that another time, I hope. How does it feel to have the community name a school after you?
Well, it certainly is a great honor. I feel so pleased, and yet, in a way, I wonder whether I warranted it. I'm just a local boy, you know. Well, I may be 93, but I've always lived in Iowa City, and I went through the schools in Iowa City. I went all through high school and the university, so I do feel like I'm sort of a part of the school system, though I'm not famous like the names of many of the men, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Grant Wood. Oh, there were many great people who had a reputation, had achieved fame in many fields for whom they named the schools. And I think I'm the first local one the school's been named after, and well, whether I warrant it, I don't know, but at least I'm very happy with it.
Well, certainly you have the historical linkage and perspective that is so important.
Oh, may I mention one other thing? When it was announced, it happened to be in the Cedar Rapids paper, that the school was to be named for me. There's a friend of mine up there who was quite a comic, and he wrote and congratulated me, and he said, well, I'm glad, Irving, at last you've got a school that you can get out of.
That's good. What advice do you have for students regarding the importance of history? You've made such a lifetime habit of pursuing the study of history and recognizing its importance.
Well, of course, many people are interested in history just to be entertained, but really we should do more with the history that we study, because if we study our history, we make better decisions. I recall that when they dedicated one of the Hoover Library buildings a number of years ago, one of the speakers, Stephen Passong from Stanford University, which happened to be Hoover's alma mater, made a talk, and he made this statement, which I've never forgotten. Most nations would make sounder and wiser decisions in solving their problems if they were better students of their own history. And that is so true. I hope that our nation will be able to make sounder decisions in the future as a result of what they've learned in the war in Saudi Arabia, in what they learned about Iraq, what we learned about Somalia, what the situation is in Serbia, in Europe. There are so many things that we have, and also Southeast Asia, Vietnam. There's so many things that we've done, and we should profit by those. Nations should, and people should profit. And if I can give you just a little amusing bit, how I profited by a mistake I made in my youth. I went out to the fairgrounds and watched a balloon ascension. Those were hot air balloons. They built fires under them and got hot air in the balloon. And when it got full enough, why then it swished up, and a man went up with it. And after he'd reached a certain height, well, then he cut loose with a parachute, and he floated very gently down to the ground. And I thought, gee, that looks great. So I decided that I would experiment with it, and I got up in the haymow of our barn with an umbrella, and I jumped out of the haymow thinking I would just float down gently. Well, I got the shock of my life when I landed, because I landed stiff-legged, and I saw stars for the rest of the day. So that's the sort of thing, if you read history and see the mistakes that you made, you don't make them again. I never jumped out of a haymow again with an umbrella. Well, that's just a little facetious remark.
That's a pretty graphic example. I think we all understand it. That's one way to become educated, through experiences that are pretty concrete. How has education, though, changed in the schools and universities and all since you were in school, particularly as we think about Weber's school?
Well, when I look at Weber School and compare it with the school that I started in, there's just no comparison in the buildings. I started at the 4th Ward School in Iowa City. That was on the southwest corner of Dodge Street and Court Street. It was really just a big corner lot was all it was. The school, it was comfortable, all right, but we didn't have the facilities that they have in the schools today. Today, there are so many facilities that are offered. And I know in high school they teach typing. And when I was a senior in university, I realized that I should know how to type. And I went back to high school and took a course so I could use the touch system. And I just thought so many times how fortunate children are today that they're able to learn to type and to operate the many machines, business machines, that are utilized. And they learn those today in school, things that we didn't learn before. But I must say this, we had some marvelous teachers in my day. The junior high in those days was called a grammar school. And I remember I did have a teacher who taught us grammar, and she taught us grammar that I never had anyone else give me that sort of a background. I not only learned what the proper words were, but I learned why it should be the accusative case instead of the nominative case, and what caused it. And this teacher was marvelous at drilling that into us. So that's one of the things that we did to get when I went to school. But we didn't have the buildings, we didn't have the playgrounds, we didn't have the extracurricular activities that we have today.
As you think about our students that will be coming together at Irving Weber, and you've alluded to the importance of history, what other words of advice or wisdom would you have for them?
Well, Dr. Berger, I had the good fortune, Mrs. Weber and I had the good fortune to go to the Olympic Games 3 times. I never was good enough to make the team, so I went as a spectator. But I always remember at the opening ceremonies, that's the greatest pageant in the world. There are the athletes of 125 nations gathered together on the infield, probably 5,000 athletes. And as they carry on the ceremonies, there is a great big billboard up at the end of the stadium. And on that are the words of the man who organized the Olympic Games, Baron Pierre de Coubertin of France. And those words run like this: the important thing in the Olympic Games is not winning, but taking part. The essential is not fighting, is not conquering, but fighting well. Well, now you know of those 5,000 athletes that are down there, there are only a few of them that will be gold medalists, and most of them will just be also Rands. But they've had the thrill, the pleasure, the training of competing with the best in the world. And my advice to boys and girls is, remember, you can't all be the champs, of course. You can't all be the star wingback or the star tailback. You can't be the valedictorian of your class, all of you. But you all will be in there working, and you'll all be profiting. And my advice is that you keep driving ahead, and while you aren't the champ, you are doing better each time. And that's what I think is a championship in itself. If you better your best time, if you do your better schoolwork each time, that's a victory in itself. And that's my advice. Just work, work, work. Even if you're not the leader, if you're not the champ, keep driving ahead. It'll pay off in the end. I've seen it happen many, many times.
You particularly, I'm sure, saw that happen in your work with Quality Check. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as a swimmer?
Yes. Well, of course, as a swimmer, we did learn the importance of training hard. We didn't train as hard as they do today because nobody knew that. And speaking of learning in business, one rather amusing bit. We organized a group called Quality Check, and that's neither here nor there, but we wanted to impress the people of the country that we were national, and so we wanted to advertise in two big magazines, Saturday Evening Post and Life. They were the leading magazines. And that was right at the time that root beer was so popular, and they were doing a lot with root beer and putting vanilla ice cream in it, and they called it root beer float. And we got the idea that, well, now that might make a good ice cream, a root beer ice cream. No one had ever made it before, and but we didn't think we just should call it root beer. We called it Jolly Root Beer. And the idea took off like a skyrocket and went great, but it didn't repeat. And so we learned that when you're coming out with something new, test it first. Be sure you have something that is sound. And in our Quality Check group, whenever anyone comes up with something that is a little bit questionable or that hasn't been checked out, it's just a common word to say, well, another Jolly Root Beer, and that ends the idea. So when we make mistakes, let's profit by them, and that's what we've tried to do in our ice cream business. I wandered a little here, but...
well, that's fascinating. I just would remind people that you were president of Quality Check for 25 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this year is the 50th year of that company. Is that right?
That's right.
So you've seen a lot of growth and been a part of it.
Well, that's right, and I better be careful that I don't start talking about it too much. But it has grown now to where it's about a $3 billion sales institution. But I shouldn't talk more about that.
So you have learned from experience, though, and that's the point. Yes.
Right. I certainly did, and we made a number of mistakes, but we never made them twice.
As you went through your business career and school and swimming and so on, when the going got really rough for you and you sometimes thought you didn't know if you could make it, were there any words that you, or sayings that you kind of turned to that helped you get through?
Well, about the only thing I ever could say to myself, well, you've got to work. You've got to keep staying at it, and maybe it'll work out in the end. And I have found that is so true. So often we think that there's just no use of doing something, and then we do try and try and try, and I had some experiences that way where I tried when I didn't think there was really much use, but that worked out. So that's one experience I had that profited